Hi, I'm Effie. This is What Effie Reads, and today I wanted to have a cozy sort of chat, hence the cozy, wintry, autumny wear that I've got on today. And I just wanted to talk about the way that virginity is portrayed in books. Now, this isn't going to be a video that covers a lot of different approaches. I will touch on briefly the way that virginity is covered in a few different books, and because I don't have a plan going into this, I just kind of wanted to have a cozy little chat. I don't know at this point what books I'm going to talk about, but check the description to be sure that you don't get spoilers for any of the books that I'm talking about. I mean, I'm only going to be talking in relation to the way that virginity is handled in these books. So beyond that, I'm not really going to be talking about the plot, except for the book that started this whole idea of wanting to have a chat, and that is Filthy Rich Vampire by Geneva Lee. So from what I can understand, Filthy Rich Vampire and the sequels that I can't remember the titles of off the top of my head were originally indie published and have now been picked up by a traditional publisher. So they're being re-released and the original editions have been pulled. So unfortunately, I can only comment on the first book, Filthy Rich Vampire, because I haven't read the rest of the series and don't know how the virginity is handled in the rest of the series. However, I did feel like... So let me start by saying I actually really liked the book, with the exception of the virginity angle. Okay, so we're prepared for the fact that I'm going to be talking in quite a lot of spoilers about Filthy Rich Vampire. We're all prepared? Awesome. Okay, so Filthy Rich Vampire. It has been billed as Twilight meets Bridgerton, somewhat of a lazy comp title, or couple of comp titles if I'm being honest, because in terms of Twilight comparisons, it's really just the vampires. The vampires do have venom, but the venom operates in a different way in Filthy Rich Vampire compared to the way that venom operates in Twilight. But beyond that, there's not that much comparison. We certainly don't have a Jacob character, for example, or at least in the first book there's no Jacob character. And the Bridgerton comparison is even weaker because Filthy Rich Vampire is set in present day. It may be a few years ago, I'm not 100% sure of like timelines, but like it's very much the now. And the only reason that it's been compared to Bridgerton is that there is a vampire social season going on and the vampires are trying to find matches, or rather this particular social season they're trying to find matches. It seems like they're two things that, like, I think it's called The Ritual. You know, I only read this book like 2 weeks ago, so it should be fairly fresh, but I have a memory like a sieve, unless it's spoilers, in which case I remember spoilers for books I haven't read, in which case I remember them for years and it really annoys me. I don't know why my memory works like that, but yay. So I think what it is it's called the ritual. I think when vampires are looking for a mate, a companion, someone to marry and have babies with. But there's also a social season. So social season happens every 50 years, I think. And then the ritual is much less frequent. I think it's like every 200 years. I don't remember the ins and outs. But essentially, that's the only reason it's compared to Bridgerton, is that there's a social season going on with lots of parties and Oh, it's called The Rites. That's what it's called. It's called The Rites. Because there's a point where it's like, the first rite has started. And yeah, it's all very melodramatic, but a really good time if you ignore what I'm going to get in about the Virginity, which I've been recording for almost 7 minutes and I haven't gotten to. So, we have a female main character and a male main character. They are called Thea and Julian, I believe. Oh my gosh, imagine if I've got the female main character's name wrong. So, Thea is a virgin. This is established fairly early on into the story. So, Thea is a human. She is a cellist. She is in a lot of medical debt because her mother had cancer. Her mother's okay now. But because of her mother's cancer treatment, and she lives in America, which, you know, if you don't live in America, you're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Medical debt. That's what America's known for. That and guns. So she's in a lot of medical debt. She's a cellist. She's still in university. I believe she's in her final year of university. And then you've got Julian, who is a vampire. He is 1,000-ish years old, almost 1,000. I think he was born around 1066. So he's an old guy, basically. And as soon as Julian lays eyes on Thea, he immediately feels very protective of her and he fancies her, etc., etc. There's a one point, and this is like when it's established that she's a virgin, there's one point where they are about to have sex because he just cannot resist. And then she tells him that she's a virgin and immediately he's like, no, 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 I'm out of here. And has to immediately drink someone's blood because he's that horny. And throughout the book, it is built up as being a thing that she is a virgin. So you know that there's going to be a reason why her virginity is important to the story. And as much as I don't like that being the case, and this is where I can compare it to, funny enough, another vampire book where the character is a virgin. So by comparison, in Veils and Vampires, which is the second book in the Vampires of the Demonverse series by Cee Bee, the female main character is a virgin. And the reason that is significant is because something that happens to her only happens when she has sex for the first time. But the difference between the way that was treated and the way that it's treated in Filthy Rich Vampire is like a massive chasm of difference. Because in Veils and Vampires, it's very much a case of, oh, okay, you're a virgin. Oh, okay, so that's why this thing hasn't happened. And then it isn't a big deal. It's just like when she's ready to have sex, she has sex, and that's that. Whereas in Filthy Rich Vampire, you know it's going to be a big thing because it's built up throughout. It's also been established that it is a law that vampires can't have sex with, I think it's specifically virginal humans. So it's a big wide world, but in terms of the first book, you really only meet vampires and witches, who are referred to as familiars, and then you also have humans. So there's this law that the Vampire Council has created that for many years has said that vampires cannot have sex with virgin humans. But throughout most of the book, you don't know why that's the case. You do get an answer for why at the end, and I actually hate it. I hate it so much. I will say what the why is right now, so this is your last chance to click away if you don't want to know why virginity is important to the plot of the book. even saying that sentence hurts me in the soul. But essentially, there's this thing whereby when a vampire has sex with a virgin, doesn't matter if they're a familiar, a vampire, or a human, but when they have sex with a virgin, something called tethering occurs, which in the case of the person that is the virgin, they basically become besotted and like inseparable from the vampire. And in the case of the person who isn't a virgin, I'm not sure how it works in the case of where both of them are virgins, because that has been established that like vampires like deliberately lose their virginity in such a way that like the person they're tethered to is someone they don't mind being tethered to. But that sort of makes it seem like they pair two virginal vampires together to lose their virginity to. I don't know. It's a whole thing. But basically, the one who isn't a virgin then basically for the rest of the virgin's life has a protective instinct, and the tethering on their side means that like they will always have to stay, like not necessarily literally by their side, but they'll always have to stay by the side of the virgin and protect them and all that kind of nonsense. So that's why it's a thing. But just to add like an extra layer to it, and like this is something that like given that it is a romantasy was pretty clear like almost immediately in the story. But oh gosh, it's so cringe. Like it is that like for all my negatives that I'm saying in this book, I did actually genuinely enjoy it, if like when I overlooked the virginity nonsense. But the Thea and Julian are fated mates. It's established that this is incredibly rare, so people are like, are they actually mates? But they're like, yeah, they genuinely are mates. But like the added level with the virginity is that the mating bond is not sealed until they have sex. So they're in this situation where they can't have sex because Thea is a virgin. But if they don't have sex, they won't have the mating bond, and it's hinted that there's a lot of protections around the mating bond. So basically, like, Julian's still free to like try and find a more suitable person to marry and have babies with until he has the mating bond established, in which case then I don't know, who knows what on earth's going to go on with the rest of the series. Like I do think it's going to be fine, but I'm also like, you've put so many roadblocks in place that you're like, how are you going to establish this properly? But where it becomes a big issue, apart from the fact that from a plot perspective you're rooting for these characters, but the only way to get beyond the tethering issue is for Thea to have sex with someone else. But you're like, you don't want that to happen, but you also don't want them to be tethered to each other. So it makes it really difficult to properly root for the characters because you've put this massive obstacle in their way. So I am interested to see how it play out. And like I say, I'm going to continue the series. I did actually enjoy it. But the issue that I have with the whole virginity thing, beyond the ick of it, is the fact that, like, for people that virginity matters to, I'm not gonna undervalue it, and society does put a lot of stakes in virginity, but it's so bloody heteronormative. And this is something that I kind of struggled with the book. Not the heterosexuality of it, because I read heterosexual books, I read queer books, like I read all pairings. But the issue I had was that the way that virginity is established in this book, and don't get me wrong, like I do understand that in a heteronormative society that unfortunately, at least in Britain, the US, etc., this is what virginity is depicted as being. I understand that virginity is depicted as being P&V and like everything else is fair game, but it is so like, it's so abstract because like that, I can't even get my words out properly. So I'm going to take a step back to talk about how virginity is discussed in A Lesson in Thorns, which is the first book in the Thorn Chapel series. I do want to continue it, but unfortunately it's really difficult to get your hands on copies of it in the UK. So that's why I've only read the first book. But the way that virginity is handled is very interesting. So without going into the plot in any great detail, this group of friends need a virgin for a ritual that they're carrying out. Like, again, like virginity as a kind of plot device. But the way that Sierra Simone handles it is just completely different to the way that it's handled in the likes of Filthy Rich Vampire. So, sorry, my foot's gone dead. I have to wiggle a bit. So in A Lesson in Thorns, this group of friends, they know each other well, but they don't necessarily know who's a virgin, who isn't. They kind of know like who likes kink, but kink doesn't mean that you're not a virgin. So they have a conversation and they go, okay, so we know this person's a virgin, who else? And then they have this conversation where they're like, yeah, but how are we defining a virgin? Are we defining it as P&V? Are we defining it as mouth on genitals? Are we defining it as P&A? Like, how are we defining it? And it's a whole like multi-page conversation where they basically talk about the fact that virginity is very much like a societal thing, and it doesn't have true value, especially if you're looking outside of a heterosexual lens. And I think it's very interesting the way that it's discussed there, contrasted with the way that it is discussed in Filthy Rich Vampire, because it's very much a case of they put a definition for themselves on what they're going to say is virginity, but only for their own purposes as well, only for the thing they're doing where they require a virgin, because they're very much like, it's kind of BS, this idea of virginity anyway. But what I do know is their definition of virginity is not just restricted to P&V. And, you know, without rehashing the whole 3-page or multi-page conversation that they have, and it's a theme throughout the book as well, this discussion of like virginity and how like it doesn't have necessarily a set meaning, especially within the queer community. And just to like go back to Filthy Rich Vampire, it is very much like virginity is P&V and anything else seems to be fair game. I will say, like, fair play, Thea and Julian do not have P&A, but the way the story is put forward, I wouldn't be surprised if they had P&A and went, oh well, you're still a virgin, it's gravy, because they do basically everything else. And in fact, and I could have misremembered this part of the story or misread what happened in that instance, but I'm pretty sure they have a bit of just the tip and they're still like, oh no, still a virgin, still gravy. But what makes it even more ridiculous for me is that the book, and this is something that I found kind of funny about the book, is that it's pretty self-aware. So at one point it's said that because vampires' powers like reside in their touch, they often wear gloves. So Julian says to Thea that vampires believe that holding hands is more intimate than anything else. So at one point, Thea and Julian are holding hands, and Julian's like, I can feel a mating bond trying to come into place. Like, this is so bad. And I'm like, how can you be so self-aware and also not? And also on the topic of self-awareness, there is a point in the book where Thea's talking to her friend about what she's done with Julian, and she can't verbalize it. And she even says that if she can't say the words, she probably shouldn't be doing it. And I'm like, yeah, you're probably not ready for sex. Like, it's no shame not being ready, but like, you need to be able to talk about it. And it's not even like this was a situation where, like, normally that conversation would be taboo and that's why she's feeling uncomfortable. It's just literally, she's like, we did some things. And her friend's like, things? What do you mean? She's like, with her mouth. It's like, just, it's so frustrating. I'm sure I have other things to say on this topic, but I can't immediately say off the top of my head because unstructured, just a general chit chat. I would absolutely love to know like your thoughts on the way that virginity is handled in books, because I feel like I am seeing a shift away from the kind of virginity being handled the way that it's handled in Filthy Rich Vampire, and also just like a lot of the books that, so yeah, I do feel like I'm seeing a move away from that. And I should also say as well that there's a difference between the way that virginity might be discussed in YA, and that's a whole other conversation. Like, it's not for me to dictate what should and shouldn't be in YA. Like, I'm not out here saying I want spice in YA, but I'm also not gonna say, oh no, it's completely inappropriate for anything to be in YA. But I don't know, like, it's not my conversation to have, because at the end of the day, I am in my 30s and I don't have children, never intend to have children. So it's not my conversation about what should and shouldn't be in YA. So I'm really just talking about adult books and the way that virginity is discussed in adult books. And as I say, I feel like there is a bit of a shift away from the virginity that we're seeing portrayed in Filthy Rich Vampire, even though I'm not sure when this video is going to go up, so it may have just come out or it may be about to come out when this video goes up. But I'm seeing more of a shift towards the kind of things that Simone will portray. Like, for example, Salt in the Wound, if I'm remembering that one correctly, is book 0.5 in the Lioness trilogy, which is a ongoing, we've only just had book 1 released in September, but is an ongoing trilogy that Simone's put out. And in book 0.5, one of the characters needs to no longer be a virgin. And the way that it's done, so specifically in this instance, the character needs to no longer have an intact hymen, and like the way it's dealt with is very like tactful, and it's not done in a way that you feel like it's perpetuating a certain definition of virginity. But there's also a feeling that the actions that the characters do, and like very light spoiler, they don't have P and V. The acts that the characters do carry out, like they still see their virginity as no longer being there. Like, they no longer consider themselves to be a virgin after they carry out the acts, despite them not having P and V, which many in like heterosexual communities would say is where the line of virginity versus not virginity lies. And I think that's very interesting. I should also point out that it's another queer series. Like, both of the characters involved in this situation are some flavour of queer. Like, they don't have labels put on them, but it's established that they are not heterosexual. So that could possibly be why. I think it's something that I'm very interested in seeing going forward, whether it is a thing that we see more of a broader definition of what virginity is and isn't in books where the characters are queer versus books where the characters aren't queer. I should also point out that Filthy Rich Vampire, whilst the main characters haven't been established as being anything other than heterosexual, there is a side character who, it's been established, likes all genders. So there is queerness in the world. Like, gosh, could you imagine how ridiculous it would be if a book just like was like, oh, queer people just don't exist. Like, not that like there's homophobia, transphobia, etc. Just queer people just don't exist in this world. I think it would be an interesting conversation to have in a book that's a bit more self-aware. If they go, okay, so what does this mean for characters who aren't het, since you've established that this and only this counts as virginity? I don't know. I don't know if this has even been an interesting conversation. I've certainly enjoyed talking about this. It's definitely something that got me all fired up. So leave thoughts in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, love you. Bye.